Most people don't think. They react. They repeat. They conform. They confuse information with understanding and opinion with truth. They fill their heads with noise, but never stop to ask, why do I believe what I believe? You can live your whole life without ever really thinking. Go to school, get the job, buy the house, vote like your parents, pray like your culture. You do everything right, but you never once sit alone and ask, what if I'm wrong? That's why philosophy matters, because the philosopher's job is not to memorize answers. It's to destroy illusions, especially the ones that make you feel safe. Blaise Pascal once wrote, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Why? Because silence forces confrontation. Without distraction, your mind begins to reveal its layers. And if you're honest, you'll see how much of your life has been lived on autopilot. Seneca, the Stoic, warned against busyness. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. He said most people are not living. They're consuming, rushing, multitasking, reacting. But reflection, rare. Because to reflect means to face yourself, and that's terrifying. Socrates was famous for doing one thing, asking questions. He didn't lecture. He didn't preach. He walked the streets of Athens, asking people why they believed, what they believed, and most couldn't answer. Not because they were stupid, but because they had never examined their own minds. That's why he said, the unexamined life is not worth living. Not because life is meaningless without thinking, but because unexamined belief is not truly yours. It's inherited, imitated, absorbed without awareness. And that's not thought, that's programming. Philosophical thinking begins when you realize this: most of what you believe about life, love, God, politics, morality was given to you, and you never asked if it was true. So what does the philosopher do? He stops, he questions, he doubts, but not out of rebellion, out of courage, because doubt is the beginning of clarity. René Descartes once locked himself in a room and tried to strip away everything he could not absolutely prove. He doubted his senses, he doubted his memories, he even doubted mathematics, until he reached one point that could not be denied. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Everything else was negotiable, but thought itself, that was real. And from there, he rebuilt his world. That's what philosophers do. They don't settle, they reconstruct. From the foundation up, even if it means standing alone, even if it means losing certainty, even if it means being misunderstood. In today's world, people are overloaded with data, but starved for insight. They have access to infinite content, but no clarity. They have opinions on everything, but understanding of nothing, because understanding requires depth, and depth requires time, silence, focus, sacrifice, things most people avoid, because real thought hurts. It tears away illusions, it reveals contradiction, it exposes fear, and it shows you how shallow you've been living. But that pain is sacred, because it means you're beginning to wake up. You're no longer satisfied with easy answers. You've begun to think like a philosopher. Philosophy doesn't begin with truth, it begins with doubt. Not the shallow kind that says, I disagree, but the deep kind that says, maybe I've never really thought at all. Socrates mastered this. He didn't claim to be wise. He claimed to know nothing, and that was his power. Because while others clung to beliefs, he questioned them. I know that I know nothing. Socrates, that wasn't self-deprecation. It was freedom. Freedom from illusion, from dogma, from false certainty. That's the first step. Radical doubt. It breaks the grip of inherited belief. It opens space for something real, and it terrifies people. Because most minds aren't built to handle uncertainty. They want comfort, conformity, closure. But philosophers, they want clarity, even if it hurts. The second trait of a philosophical mind is precision, not just in thought, but in language, because language is how you see. If your words are vague, your thoughts are muddy. If you say everything happens for a reason, you haven't thought, you've repeated a slogan. Ludwig Wittgenstein spent his life analyzing language. To him, philosophy was not about discovering truth, but untangling the mess we create with careless speech. He said, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." He wasn't trying to be poetic. He meant it literally. If you can't define it, you don't understand it. Philosophical thinking demands you sharpen your words until they cut through illusion. Love? Define it. Justice? Define it. Freedom? Under what conditions? If your words can't survive definition, your beliefs can't survive reality. The third core element is depth, not complexity, depth. A simple question, examined completely, reveals more than 1,000 facts. Philosophers don't ask more questions. They ask better ones, and they go deeper than most dare. Nietzsche didn't write textbooks. He wrote with a hammer. He wasn't interested in polite conversation. He wanted to break idols. He once wrote, "When you look into the abyss also looks into you." Real thought forces you to confront what you've ignored, not just out there, but in yourself, your motives, your contradictions, your fear of your own potential. That's why most people don't think deeply, not because they're incapable, but because it demands too much. It demands solitude, silence, willingness to be wrong, and worst of all, it demands that you evolve. Philosophy isn't passive. It's not reading dead books or quoting smart people. It's a battle with your own mind, and only those who are ready to let go of who they were can ever become who they're meant to be. Philosophers don't just think deeply, they think precisely, not because they want to sound clever, but because they want to see clearly. To do that, they use tools, mental tools, conceptual scalpels, that cut through confusion, illusion, and noise. The first tool is causal analysis. Most people confuse correlation with cause. Something happens. They invent a story. They fail a job interview. I wasn't confident enough. Someone leaves them. I wasn't lovable. But is that the real cause, or just the first explanation that feels familiar? David Hume warned us about this. He said, "We never observe cause directly. We only observe sequence." That means you can't just assume that one thing caused another because it came before it. You must test it, interrogate it, ask, what evidence do I have? What variables might I be ignoring? Could the real cause be something else entirely? A philosopher doesn't jump to answers. He dissects the question. The second tool is distinction. Aristotle used this constantly. He broke down vague terms into precise categories. For example, justice isn't just one thing. There's distributive justice, corrective justice, legal justice, personal virtue. Each one operates differently. Without distinction, you debate shadows. With it, you sharpen truth. The third tool, paradox. Most people fear contradiction. Philosophers explore it. Kierkegaard built his whole philosophy on paradox. He believed truth is not always logical. Sometimes it's existential. He wrote, "The greatest hazard of all, to risk and not be willing to lose." To him, faith was not rational certainty. It was the leap into the unknown, knowing it might break you. That's not weakness. That's real courage. Philosophers use paradox, not to confuse, but to stretch the mind beyond surface logic, to see where reason ends and existence begins. Another tool, conceptual clarification. Wittgenstein believed most philosophical problems are actually problems of language. You argue for hours, but you're not even using the same definitions. One person says freedom, thinking of personal choice. Another thinks of national sovereignty. Without agreement on words, there's no point debating ideas. That's why philosophers clarified terms before making claims. And then there's the most important tool, deliberate reflection. Marcus Aurelius, Stoic emperor, wrote meditations every day, not for others, for himself, to reflect, to examine his thoughts, fears, desires, and judgments. He trained his mind like a warrior trains his sword, every day, in solitude, without applause. That's how philosophers think, not with noise, but with discipline, not by collecting facts, but by challenging assumptions, not by talking more, but by listening deeper to reality, to reason, to themselves. These tools don't make you superior, they make you clear. And in a world of confusion, clarity is power. Thinking like a philosopher is not just a mental upgrade, it's a transformation, not of what you know, but of how you live. Because once you begin to think clearly, you stop living blindly, and the world is never the same. You start to notice how much noise people speak without saying anything. You see how opinions form, not from thought, but from fear, not from logic, but from belonging. People don't speak truth, they speak to fit in. And once you stop needing that, you stop pretending. You no longer say things just to sound clever. You say less dash, but mean more. You become dangerous to illusions because your questions cut through appearances. You're not fooled by status or titles or the loudest voice in the room. You've seen how shallow the world can be, and you're no longer part of the performance. You also stop chasing everything. More likes, more validation, more possessions. You've realized what most call happiness is just a distraction from pain, and most ambition is just a mask for insecurity. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And when you think like a philosopher, you start looking for that why, not the one society gives you, not the one your parents handed down, your own. That's why pain doesn't destroy you anymore, because now you study it. You ask what it's teaching you. You feel it fully, but you don't become it. You suffer consciously. And that changes everything. Philosophical thinking doesn't remove chaos. It makes you resilient within it. You stop expecting life to be fair. You stop needing people to agree. You stop requiring comfort. To act with clarity, you still fall, but you fall with awareness. And you rise without self-deception. Your relationships change too. You no longer cling to people who comfort your ego, but challenge nothing in you. You seek conversations that sharpen thought. You respect silence. You leave space for contradiction, because the people who think deeply aren't afraid to disagree. They're afraid of shallowness. And most of all, you begin to live from the inside out. You're no longer just reacting to the world. You're shaping your perception of it. You're not chasing meaning. You're constructing it day by day, thought by thought, action by action, not to impress, but to align with your truth. This isn't easy. It's lonely, slow, uncomfortable, but it's real. And once you've tasted it, you can't go back, because anything less feels like betrayal. In a world that runs on speed, the philosopher slows down. In a world that values noise, he listens. In a world that worships certainty, he chooses doubt. Because to think, truly think, is an act of rebellion. It's easy to follow trends, to quote what's popular, to mimic what sounds smart. But to sit in silence, strip away your illusions, and ask, what do I actually know? That's rare. That's dangerous. That's powerful. You don't need a degree to be a philosopher. You don't need fame or followers or books on a shelf. You need only one thing: the courage to see clearly, to ask better questions, to dismantle your false self, to stand alone, if it means standing in truth. And no, this won't make life easier. It will make it deeper. You will suffer more consciously. You will love more deliberately. You will speak more honestly. You will live on your own terms. Not because you figured it all out, but because you finally stopped lying to yourself. Share this video with someone who's ready to stop reacting and start thinking. Comment below, I choose depth over noise. Let's see how many minds are done living on the surface. The journey continues in the next video, because this isn't about reaching answers. It's about becoming someone who dares to ask the right questions.